I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, which for me is the Larrakia people. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I acknowledge the profound impacts of domestic violence on individuals, families, and the wider community in Australia. I support initiatives aimed at preventing domestic and family violence and creating a space where everyone feels safe and supported. Finally, I wish to acknowledge that we all come from different places and have different circumstances. I respect and welcome our collective differences, and I strive to create a space where all voices are heard and valued, and where everyone feels comfortable in engaging and participating. I do ask that you turn off your microphones for today's session until the end, when you'll feel free to ask questions, and we'll have lots of time today for questions. But I do ask that you turn on your video if you can. I know some of you will be eating your lunch, but if you can turn on your video, I'm sure Katherine will appreciate it. Today's session will be recorded and made available on the Animico YouTube channel in the upcoming weeks for those who might be interested in listening to it again, or for sharing it with your friends and colleagues. You can check out our other speakers there too. Before we get started today, I wanted to give you a brief update on the upcoming NABS initiatives. Next Wednesday, the 10th of June, from 12:30 to 1:30 Australian Central Standard Time, we have our next think tank with Nathan Hancock from Citrus Australia. While Nathan's presentation will focus on traceability in the citrus sector, the session will provide you with a space to consider how their solutions or other approaches might be used to add value to your industry or organisation, and what opportunities there might be for you to utilise this knowledge in new or novel ways. On Thursday, the 18th of June, from 11 till 11:45 Australian Central Standard Time, we are delighted to have a check-in session as part of our Mind Your Melon initiative. This session will have a mental health champion give their story and then provide you with a tool so that you can use to go into small breakout groups. Our next Lunch with Leaders session will be held on the 31st of July from 12:30 to 1:30 Australian Central Standard Time. That session will be with Andrew Bishop, former Chief Plant Health Officer for Tasmania, who is now running a successful consulting business. And while it is a while away, we are taking a bit of a break over the school holidays in July, as many of you will be taking leave. For more information on any of our initiatives, visit the Animico website, or you can reach out to either myself or Chantel through nabs@af.gov.au. And if you're not on our email distribution list and would like to be, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email and we will sign you up. Just before we move on, I would like to let you know that there will be a survey at the end of today's session. Your feedback helps us to make these sessions as good as we can for you and ensure we are catering to your needs. So take a minute just to fill that out if you can. And at this point, I'd really like to introduce you to Dr. Katherine Clift. Katherine Clift commenced as the New South Wales Independent Biosecurity Commissioner on 1 September 2025. Dr. Clift is a nationally and internationally respected leader in biosecurity, animal welfare and regulatory reform. She's a veterinarian with a Master in Veterinary Public Health Management, a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and an Executive Fellow of the Australia and New Zealand School of Government. Having held senior leadership positions for animal welfare and biosecurity in Victoria, Western Australia, the Australian Government and overseas, Dr. Clift brings valuable expertise to support the continued improvement of New South Wales biosecurity systems. Dr. Clift's appointment reflects her proven leadership, technical expertise and deep commitment to Australia's biosecurity and animal welfare system, while building public trust through strong partnerships and innovation. Welcome, Katherine. It is such a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you, Anne, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak today. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today, and acknowledge all of the traditional owners of all of the lands and waters that you're joining from today. When Anne asked me to do this session on leadership, I have to admit I felt slightly uncomfortable about it. I'm an introvert by nature, and talking about myself for nearly an hour is really not my happy place. So while I don't really think of myself as a leadership speaker, I would say I'm someone who has had a lot of interesting experiences. I've made a few mistakes along the way, and I've learnt from a lot of good people and from some difficult situations too. So I'm happy to share those experiences with you today. I think it's easy to look back now on my career and see how my current role as the Independent Biosecurity Commissioner is the result of my previous experiences, which Anne spoke to. It probably looks quite planned from the outside, but it certainly didn't feel like that from the inside. So I grew up near Minlaton in South Australia on the Yorke Peninsula. But before that, my mum and I lived near Adelaide in what was basically a tiny shack near the beach. My mum was a single mother in the 1970s before there was much support for single parents. And the house had no internal bathroom or running water inside. And years later, we went back and had a look at it before it was demolished and realised just how rough it was. And the reason my mum could afford it was because it was rent controlled, because the council considered it to be substandard for living conditions. She worked as a cleaner because that was one of the few jobs she could have where she could take me along with her. So it was tough, but my mum comes from a really long line of very resilient women. And then my mum met my dad, who was a farmer, and we moved out to the Yorke Peninsula, and our lives changed enormously. So I have reflected a lot over the years on how luck and opportunity can make a difference in people's lives. Hard work matters too, obviously, but opportunities matter and having people who believe in you. Growing up on the farm was fantastic in many ways, but small rural communities can be difficult places at times when you're a bit different. I had a terrible speech impediment as a child, and I also had dyslexia, which I'll be talking about later. Although back then, no one really talked about or recognised learning difficulties. You were just considered slow, lazy, or not trying hard enough. I was also quite academic in a community that really valued sporting ability above everything else, and I'm spectacularly bad at sport. So school was not necessarily always an enjoyable experience, and I remember feeling very conscious about not fitting in. One thing my parents did really well, though, was that they never put any limits on what I or my sisters could do because we were girls. We didn't have any brothers, it was just myself and my two younger sisters, and we did everything. So we drove tractors, helped with the harvest, lambed sheep, worked in the sheep yards and the shearing sheds, farrowed sows, and helped with the home kill. One of my earliest memories is my dad standing on the back of the ute, forking hay out for the sheep while I was very carefully steering the ute, probably at about 4 years of age. My mum was completely involved in the business side of the farm, so negotiating with the bank, dealing with suppliers, managing grain sales, particularly after deregulation occurred. So watching my parents work as equals really shaped me enormously as well. But outside of our family, expectations could be different. I remember my mum marching down to the school one day because they tried to force me to do home economics instead of the more technical subjects that I wanted to do. And my parents could see that I had potential and I wanted to do more than the local school could offer. So when I got to year 10, I went off to boarding school. And that was quite a big sacrifice at that time. It was quite a difficult time for farming, as is often the case, and it was pretty tough financially. And there were certainly some comments made around our family possibly being a bit above ourselves, or whether that was a waste of good money on education for a girl. But boarding school was a massive shock to the system for me. In the first week of English, we were assigned an essay, and I had to actually ask the teacher what an essay was. because I just wasn't familiar with that. So it took me a whole year just to catch up academically. But it was also the first time I'd been in an environment where being academic wasn't something to hide. So I learnt a lot growing up in Middleton. I really value kindness, tolerance and diversity, and I believe strongly that everyone has a right to be respected for being their own unique self. You really can't make people fit into those boxes, and some of those expectations can be pretty stifling. I'm sure many of you are living in rural and regional communities, and they can be absolutely a great strength and source of support, but they can also be a bit isolating if you're different or you come from outside. So I do encourage you to think about how you can make people feel welcome and how you can help your community to be a really safe and inclusive and welcoming place for people too. After school, I went off to Murdoch University and I studied veterinary science. And people often ask me why I became a vet. And to be honest, probably part of the answer is I just watched too much James Herriot, All Creatures Great and Small. But also where I grew up, vets were one of the only professions that I actually saw in action. And no one in my family had been to university before. So I didn't have a lot of professional role models. After graduating, I was determined to work in rural mixed practice, and that was probably my first experience of workplace discrimination. My male friends and colleagues all got jobs really quickly, and all of them were employed well before our final year finished. But for the women, it took us often many months, in fact, sometimes post-graduation, to find employment. And some of the practices were pretty upfront and they just said it wasn't suitable work for a woman to do. And others just never got back to us at all. Eventually, I did get a job in Bordertown, and the clinic was pretty tiny, and the equipment had certainly seen better days. But I've always tried to pick my opportunities based on the people and the ability to learn. And the clinic partners, Ken and Vic, they were absolutely wonderful mentors and supports. There was no girls can only do cats and dogs or protected clients that only they could see, no easing me in gently. I remember my first week there going out to do a calving, and the farmer looked around and asked where the vet was. And I said I was the vet, and he asked where Ken and Vic were. And I explained again that I was the available vet. And fortunately, the calving went well. And I suspect that helped my credibility a lot in the region. But there were quite a few moments like that early in my career. And those experiences taught me something pretty important, that not everyone starts from the same position of assumed credibility. I had to prove my competence over and over again, as do a number of other people for various reasons. And it's not necessarily fair, but it is what it is. At the same time, though, I was very lucky to have bosses who backed me completely. So I'd encourage you as leaders to think about how these things can impact on your staff. How do you support people when they encounter outdated expectations, unfair assumptions, racism, sexism, or discrimination? And if you think that isn't happening these days, then I think you're probably dreaming. And it's not just about the obvious events, it's about the microaggressions too, things that can build up over time. I've been in situations, even in the recent past, where my male colleagues have been oblivious or ignored what's happening, and I get it. It's not easy to call people out when things happen, but at least you can start with paying attention and take the opportunities that you do have to support your colleagues. After a couple of years in Bordertown, my now husband and I decided that we should try living in the same town. So I moved to Adelaide and I started work in Perza. And that was a little bit by accident, but I knew I wouldn't enjoy working in small animal practice. And that was the start of my career in biosecurity. My first job was working in Johne's disease, and that was incredibly contentious at the time. I was quarantining and destocking some of the best merino sheep studs in Australia. Under policies that, to be honest, even as a new entrant to government, I had some concerns over myself. And that was probably my first real exposure to just how messy it can be in government. There were scientific uncertainties, economic impacts, politics, stakeholder pressures, community expectations, and there was no way to keep everybody happy. And I've seen that pattern occur time and time again in my career in biosecurity. So leadership, particularly I think in biosecurity, is very rarely about certainty. Most of the time you're making decisions with very incomplete information under incredible time pressures while balancing competing priorities and trying to maintain trust across groups that may fundamentally disagree with each other. Early on in my career, I thought probably that leadership meant having the answers. And the older that I get, the less I think that's true. Leadership is much more about having judgment, listening, building consensus, influencing without authority, and staying calm when things are uncertain or when you're dealing with a crisis. And having dealt with a number of emergencies, trust me, no matter how bad the situation is, adding panic never helps. There is a Maori proverb, he aho, he mea nui, ao te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. I learned an enormous amount during my time in New Zealand, particularly from Te Ao Maori, the Maori worldview, but that particular proverb has stayed with me. In the midst of a biosecurity emergency, it is the people around you who make the difference. They provide resilience, support, and those relationships will help you navigate the really difficult decisions that need to be made. One of the lessons from Johne's disease was the importance of being willing to change course. Eventually, we realised that some of the measures we were implementing to manage the disease were causing more harm than the disease itself. Sometimes in government and leadership more broadly, there can be a tendency to double down because changing direction feels like a failure. But changing direction when new information emerges is often exactly the right thing to do. I'm sure many of you here today have degrees, veterinarians, scientists, experts across a whole range of fields, and that expertise absolutely matters, but people matter more often. Relationships will determine whether you can achieve the outcomes that you want to under pressure. People will work through really hard things with people that they trust. One of my colleagues, Graham Cook, has a saying that trust builds speed. And he's right. If you don't already have trusted relationships, it's very difficult to get things done quickly. And leadership sits at the centre of that. Working on Johne's disease, I realised pretty quickly that while my veterinary degree had been a good preparation for many things, probably not for a career in government. So I decided to undertake a master's in veterinary public health management. And for 2 years, I basically studied every evening and weekend while working full-time with a very understanding husband. It was exhausting, but it fundamentally changed the trajectory of my career. So one thing I would say is that investing in yourself is very rarely wasted. Courses, mentors, experiences, stretch opportunities, they really matter, so grab them with both hands. And as you've heard, I've moved countries, I've changed course a few times, I've taken different roles. I've always tried to think less about the title or the role and more about what did I need to learn next, what would challenge me, and what experiences would help me grow. I've also always had the approach that I'd rather regret the things I've done than those that I haven't. By nature, I probably lean a little bit more towards taking risks, but in my experience, there are very few decisions in life that are truly irreversible. And even the experiences that didn't turn out exactly like I expected still resulted in opportunities for growth. Over time, my career has taken me from Australia to New Zealand, Brussels, and back to Australia. And through emergency management, working on national committees, international trade work, and large operational leadership roles that I certainly never imagined when I was growing up in Middleton. One thing that has also shaped my leadership, although I didn't understand it for a long time, was dyslexia. I'm going to talk about my experiences with dyslexia, but every person's experience is different, and dyslexia affects different people differently. For years, I saw dyslexia as something to compensate for, and certainly not something that I talked about at work. Even now, I struggle to memorise phone numbers. I can't calculate change. I reverse digits, and my spelling, let's just say, thank goodness for spell check. Early on in my career, my work at the time introduced standardised cognitive testing, including literacy and numeracy for any managers who were seeking career development and advancement. I made a quiet inquiry to HR without disclosing my dyslexia, just asking if accommodations were available. The response was that no one with a learning disability would be on the management track, so there was no need for accommodations. And that pretty much told me everything I needed to know. Another time, I disclosed my dyslexia to a manager, and their response was, "We have very high standards here. Any material going up needs to be perfect. So no pressure, right?" So there's definitely still stigma and misunderstanding around neurodiversity in the workplace. And it's only more recently that I've felt comfortable speaking openly about my experiences. And I have come to embrace what dyslexia brings. People often remark on my ability to think differently. I can spot patterns, simplify complexity, and see opportunities that others might miss. And some of those things that people have valued professionally, I think are probably connected to my ability to think differently. And that matters because complex systems do need different kinds of thinkers. Leadership also comes in different forms too. Not all leaders are charismatic extroverts or polished communicators. Some have degrees and some don't. Some lead with their heads and others more with their heart. I think one of the best things leaders can do is create environments where people don't feel that they need to hide parts of themselves to succeed. Because many capable people will rule themselves out before anybody else does, and you miss 100% of the chances that you never take. And I think that's especially true for women. I've often noticed that women will wait until they feel completely ready before going for opportunities. For me, I was very conscious that opportunities may not come around again. I applied for and gained my first managerial role just a couple of months after moving to New Zealand. And I took another opportunity when I was 7 months pregnant with twins and about to commence parental leave. So most of the jobs that have really shaped my career arrived certainly before I felt ready for them. And I think if you wait until you feel comfortable, you probably won't grow very much. Mostly, in my experience, leadership does feel uncomfortable, and that's part of learning and growing. I think another misconception about leadership is that good leaders don't make mistakes. I've certainly made plenty, and I think anybody who works for long enough will, particularly if you're making decisions, backing people, and trying new things. One of my favourite sayings is, it's not how many mistakes you make, it's how many that you make twice. I genuinely believe that. If people are thoughtful, accountable, and learning, then mistakes are part of growth and innovation. What worries me much more is organisations where people are so afraid of making mistakes that no one will take the initiative, nobody raises risks, and everybody just manages optics. I've been in those organisations and environments, and it's not that enjoyable, and it's not conducive to really making a difference. In biosecurity, those small problems hidden early become really big problems later. One of the most meaningful pieces of feedback that I received came when I was leaving Agriculture Victoria. One of my staff said to me, the thing we valued the most was that no matter how bad the news was, we knew we could tell you. The worst that would happen was you'd sigh and say, okay, what are we going to do now? And honestly, I took that as a huge compliment because in biosecurity, leaders need people to bring them the good, the bad, and the really ugly. If people are frightened of telling you bad news, then eventually you stop hearing about things until they become a crisis. So you need to create that safety so that people can speak honestly. You can't solve problems that people are frightened to raise. Another thing I've become conscious of as I've become more senior is the importance of keeping an open door and not curating your information sources too much. And by that I mean, if you only ever talk to the same trusted people, the same stakeholder groups, and the same advisors, eventually you create a very narrow view of the world. Particularly in biosecurity, we need to hear from a wide range of people: farmers, industry, operational staff, scientists, policy people, local communities, private vets, processors, exporters. And often what you hear, it won't line up nicely. You'll hear one thing from one group and something different from another. Early in my career, I think I would sometimes assume one side must be right and the other wrong. Now when I hear things that don't mesh, I just get curious, because those differences are telling us something important. It could be that people are experiencing the system differently, that there's information missing, that unintended consequences are starting to emerge, or that there's a disconnect between the policy and how it's being delivered operationally. One of the risks in leadership is becoming overmanaged and insulated from what's really happening. Information gets filtered before it reaches you. People tell you what they think you want to hear as opposed to what you need to hear. And your teams will protect you from problems. Some of the most valuable things I've heard have come from unexpected conversations, difficult conversations, or hearing perspectives that initially didn't make a lot of sense to me. So curiosity is really important and can be very underrated. So next time you hear about a difficult stakeholder or something doesn't make sense, reach out and ask some thoughtful questions and genuinely try to understand what's happening under the surface. I was facilitating a roundtable recently, and a stakeholder caught me at the end and thanked me for giving them the opportunity to be there. He said I felt seen and heard, and also that generally he wasn't even invited to these events because of the perceptions around the industry he represents, despite the fact that that sector was very material to the discussions we were having. Who are you including and excluding, and how does that impact on how you think about issues? So I thought I'd just finish with a few things that I've learned along the way. I'd like to start with feedback. Feedback is really important. We all need it if we're going to learn and grow. Some of the most valuable lessons I've learned have come from people who were willing to tell me difficult truths. But I've also learned that feedback isn't always right. Sometimes feedback says much more about the person giving it than it does the person receiving it. If I'd listened to all the feedback that I've received during my career, I probably wouldn't have become a veterinarian, moved overseas, taken on leadership roles, or put myself forward for the opportunities that have shaped my career. Over the years, I've been told to smile more, be less decisive, be warmer, to have more fun at work, that I wasn't experienced enough, wasn't ready, or wasn't the right fit. One manager told me I wouldn't have had you in my team if I'd had a choice. And another, I'll make sure you never progress while I'm here. At those times, those comments were not much fun to hear. But looking back, they taught me something important. Not all feedback is developmental. Sometimes it's simply a reflection of another person's preferences, assumptions, frustrations, or limitations. So listen carefully, stay curious, be willing to reflect, but don't hand other people the authority to define your potential. Consider the source, look for patterns, take what is useful, and leave the rest behind. Don't accept someone else's view of what's possible for your life. Other things that I've learned, I mentioned the importance of investing in yourself and choosing the opportunities based on what you'll learn, not just the titles. The importance of relationships and people, and asking questions and listening to the answers. Don't assume all good leaders look the same. And when you build your team, they probably shouldn't look like you either. One of the risks in leadership is unconsciously surrounding yourself with people who think the same way you do, communicate the same way you do, or approach problems the same way you do. Over time, I've become much more aware of understanding my own strengths and weaknesses and building teams that complement them. Creating environments where different perspectives are welcomed rather than seen as inconvenient or difficult. One strategy to help that is when I'm discussing an issue to speak last, and that gave my team the opportunity to put forward all of their ideas first. Particularly in biosecurity, where the problems we're dealing with are complex and there's really any simple answers, diverse teams will make better decisions. A classic is the frequent divide between operations, policy, and technical areas. Good policies need to be technically robust and able to be operationalised. A little bit of robust debate goes a long way to making better decisions. And be kind. You genuinely never know what someone else is carrying or how hard they may have worked just to be in the room. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that leadership, like life, feels much messier and less certain from the inside than possibly what people may see from the outside. Most of the time, I think we're all just doing the best we can with the information we have available, trying to make good decisions, support good people, and make a difference. The challenges are becoming more complex every year in biosecurity, and we need leaders who are thoughtful, collaborative, adaptive, and human. So be willing to be curious, to keep growing, and to make a difference. So thank you, Anne, and over to you for questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Katherine. That was so insightful and I really appreciate it. And for someone who doesn't like to talk about themselves, you do an amazing job. So thank you. I see that Darren's got his hand up, so I am going to invite people to either turn on their microphone or put the questions in the chat. So Darren, you've put your hand in. Darren, it'd be great for you to put your hand back up again, but we will go to Stephen and Darren. Maybe you can rethink your question.
Thanks,
Now, hey, Stephen.
Hey, hi, Katherine. Good to see you again. Great talk, and thank you for sharing. I'd like to just understand a little bit. You shared about your dyslexia and the challenges that you faced there, and when you shared that to the whole of Biosecurity Victoria when you were here, and I found that really empowering and really a really positive move that allowed all of us to sort of see, look, we're all human, we all have challenges to go through. I'd just be interested in your thoughts about your lead up to that and making the decision to share that and sort of put that vulnerability out there, and sort of how you thought about that and why you decided to share that with a broader audience.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I think, sadly, probably what I would say is one of the reasons I'm more comfortable to share now is because I've reached a position of seniority where I feel I can do it and there is less at stake. So I have credibility, I have an established career, I'm able to do that, and there's not so much of possibly what might be a perceived or an actual risk as existed at earlier points in my career. Now, I'd like to hope that we can get to a point where that is not so much of the case. I also have family members who also are dyslexic, who are now going through the schooling system. And I would say things are changing. So I guess that does also influence my decision, because I can see that there is much more acceptance and that the younger generations really bring much more of a understanding around a whole range of diversity issues. They are really much more understanding and nuanced and really appreciative of the value of different perspectives, different people, different individualities. So I think that also gave me some confidence seeing how the younger people that I know are navigating these issues as well.
Thanks, Katherine.
Amazing. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Katherine. Darren does have his hand up. My apologies, Darren. If you want to go next, that would be amazing.
No worries. Thanks, Anne. And thanks, Katherine. Really enjoyed your presentation. Pretty shocked at some of the feedback that you've received. It's pretty sobering, I guess, and as you say, instructive. But I guess my question was really about, you mentioned you've learned a lot in relation to staying calm under crisis or under crisis scenarios. I'm sure you've probably seen a lot, and biosecurity does alerts from crisis to crisis, I've found. What tools have you used to enable you to stay calm under a crisis situation? Because that would be really useful for me, not just professionally, but personally as well. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it probably helps. I'm fairly calm by nature is probably one of them. But I do think being able to have a certain amount of detachment helps. So, and people take different strategies for different situations, but being able to compartmentalize a little bit around your work and your home to some extent has been a helpful strategy for me, and keeping perspective. And I guess this is a bit of a divergence, but stay with me. At one stage in my life, I was an ambulance officer. So when I was working in Bordertown as a vet, because I'm not sporty and it's a small community, you need to do something. And ambulance is a volunteer activity in the community. So I joined up as an ambulance officer. And doing that sort of work where it was literally life and death decisions has provided a lot more perspective to the rest of my career, where generally speaking in government, although there have been moments, but generally speaking, you're not, having a life or death decision on your hands. Certainly some decisions you're making are extremely grave with respect to the consequences for an industry. So being able to maintain a sense of perspective, I think also remaining grounded in your values. So, keeping that in mind, and values are a personal thing, but being able to keep that perspective of why you're doing the job that you're doing, why it matters. As I mentioned, the people around you are really important. So, one of the things I found helpful is the idea of 3 sources of support. So it's the 3-legged stool is the terminology people talk about, but having a close work colleague who you can talk to, who understands your work context, so someone who's familiar with what you do, but and then someone who's probably a little familiar with your work, but is safe, where you can have probably a more free vent, and outside of work, you can really get things off your chest a bit more. And then someone who's not associated with your work at all, whether that's your partner or a best mate or something like that. So having different sources of support available to you so that you can talk to people and have that in place. And I think, sometimes when things were extremely pressured, and I have been in those circumstances, really just refining down your window that you're looking at in terms of, okay, what is it that I need to achieve in the next hour, the next 6 hours, the next day, and really focusing your effort where it will make the most difference in the time period that you have, because otherwise it can just become a bit overwhelming with everything that you need to think about.
Thanks, Katherine. That's incredibly valuable. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Chantel has her hand up.
Thank you. Katherine, you may have kind of answered this question a little bit already, but I'll ask it anyway. You spoke a lot about your insight and you gave great advice about how environments could be more positive and supportive, and I could hear that it wasn't always like this for you. You mentioned that your parents were very supportive when you were growing up, but was there anything else that really helped you as an introvert to see those opportunities you knew were going to be uncomfortable and to just go for them anyway? Like, you seem really courageous to me, and I'd like some tips.
Look, I think, well, as I said, even though I'm an introvert, which I deeply believe is about where you get your energy from more than how you might present. So, I can still, quite comfortably talk to people and, do all of those things that you're expected to, particularly when you work in government. But I guess I've always had a reasonable risk appetite and wanted to seek out new opportunities and new challenges. And that's a personal thing. I'm just wired that way. But even when I've been doing that, I've always, had my big lists of my pros and my cons, and, been very analytical about assessing those sorts of things and making sure that I was comfortable with what I was doing. But as I said, at the end of the day, these decisions can always be reversed. If I moved to New Zealand and hated it, I could have moved back to Australia again, right? It costs and it takes time and all those sorts of things, but you can do it. So having that sense that things are not permanent, right? You can make one decision and then you can go and you can make a different decision if your first one didn't pan out as you expected it. I think has been something that's stood me in good stead. And also I think there is a lot of, we always anchor back to what we know. And so it is always harder to take that step into the unknown. And so doing whatever it is you need to do to reduce that unknown. So, for example, when I was thinking of moving to New Zealand, did a short trip out there just to see what it would be like. So had a bit of a tiki tour and went and had a look. So you can do things to reduce your uncertainty quotient on the other side of the equation to help you balance out those things when you're looking at those new opportunities or new challenges. Does that help?
Yes, that's awesome. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Katherine. We have Trevor and then Samantha. Trevor?
Yes, good afternoon, Katherine. Thank you for that great presentation. And on behalf of industry, I appreciated the opportunity to work with you over a number of events in Victoria, and look forward to, well, maybe not working with you with too many biosecurity issues in New South Wales, but I suppose my question is, what would be the top 3 things that you would say to a younger person looking to progress in, let's say, the biosecurity area that might help them work their way through the mire of the bureaucratic system?
That's a really good question. I think top things, as I said, invest in yourself. So if there's opportunities for, further education or just opportunities for growth and development, so secondments or things like that, take advantage of those. I think they're really important. Finding good role models, and it doesn't necessarily need to be formal mentors, but finding people who you think, gee, that's someone that I admire, I like what they do and I like how they do it, and finding opportunities to spend more time with those sorts of people. So whether that's your boss or it's someone who you can work with closely, because I think you learn a lot from the people that you work around. And so finding a good environment, good people to work with is enormously beneficial. And then, as I said, not waiting until you're ready probably for things. I reckon when you're probably about 70% of the way there is probably a good time to look for the next opportunity, because that will give you good growth. But also, if you wait until you're 100% ready, it's probably a bit late by then. So those would be my 3 pieces of advice.
Thank you.
So much. Great question, Trevor. Samantha.
Hi, kia ora, Katherine. I'm actually a Kiwi too, so it was really nice to hear from you. Thank you, by the way, as well. It was really good to hear about you navigating a lot of those challenges and, being where you are today. Very inspiring. I just wanted to ask, in those situations where I guess you were in not so supportive environments and you were getting that feedback before you moved and you found new opportunities, how did you navigate those relationships with someone who I guess in a way at that time you would feel has your career in their palm? Yeah, how did you navigate those relationships and conversations with them?
A really good question, and probably more than we can unpack in the time we have today. But generally speaking, I guess what I tried to do was focus on doing the job well to the best of my ability and focus on what was within my control. So I could control what I could do job-wise. I could control my emotions and how I felt about things. I could not control the other person in any way or form or what judgments they might have. And so looking after myself and my well-being during those pretty tough times, and focused on making sure that I was doing my job well, that I was looking after my own well-being, and to be honest, at some of those times then planning my exit strategy to find another job, because it was obvious it wasn't going to be sustainable to stay where I was. So ensuring that I had was working on plan B, because where I was probably wasn't going to work out for the longer term. I think keeping your sense of self is quite challenging in those circumstances. So yeah, it's definitely not easy. And even, reaching out for some of the supports, whether you have like an EA employee assistance program or things like that during those times, can be helpful as well. Or your colleagues, because it can be pretty challenging.
Thanks so much, Samantha, and thanks, Katherine. Katherine, I have a question. My question is, I guess you talked quite a lot about feedback, and especially feedback that you might not have liked or wanted or welcomed. And I guess, I'm probably thinking from a perspective of being a parent of one teenager and a near teenager. And how do you go about supporting people when they get that feedback and helping them to understand that that isn't necessarily the truth? So have you got any tips or strategies for that?
I think feedback's really important and really valuable, but it's recognising the role of it, and when possibly it's more about the other person than it is about you. So I think some of the things there are when is it consistent? So if you hear the same thing from a number of different people, then that's probably telling you something that you really need to be reflecting on, because it's not just one person's experience of you, it's being reflected from a number of different people. And that's where things like the 360-degree process reviews and things like that can be quite helpful. It can also be useful just to sit with something for a little bit of time, and also to have a follow-up conversation, because I think sometimes also people can be quite unaware of the feedback that they've provided or the impact that it had. So if it's appropriate, having a follow-up conversation of, this is what you said, and did you mean it in that way? And this is what I've been reflecting about that, etc. That's not always appropriate, but can be in some circumstances. So it depends a little bit on the situation. I would always say it's useful to take a breath, spend some time reflecting, and then think about what you might want to do as some follow-up action, because these things are generally better sat with for a little bit of time. I wouldn't say ruminate on them forever, but it's not something that's generally good to react to in the moment.
Amazing. Thanks for that advice. Now, just very quickly in the chat, we do have Kylie saying that she loved hearing about your journey so far, Katherine. Linda says, thank you for a brilliant presentation. Naomi really appreciates your words today. And Katherine appreciated you sharing your reflections, and particularly around the 70% ready challenge. She found that really useful. If there's no other questions, I'm going to, Chantel's put the survey in the chat for today, and I'm going to ask that you spend a few moments just filling out that survey for us. Like I said at the start, it just helps us to work out how we can provide you with the best possible experience when you're coming to these. So I'm sure you'll join me in thanking Katherine very much for being with us today. I thought that was an amazing presentation, and thank you for being so open to sharing your experiences and challenges, Katherine. That was so amazing. And yes, like I said, if you could fill out that survey, but otherwise have an amazing rest of the day, Friday, and enjoy the weekend. For those of you that have a long weekend, enjoy the extra day. And for everyone else, enjoy the weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thanks so much.
Bye all. Thank you.